Good morning, fourth grade. Unfortunately, it's Mr. Brewer again. We are going to be talking about 7-13, and it's going to be about displaying insect data, or data, if that's how you say it. I am excited to share with you today's learning goal, which is going to be record data on a line plot and answer questions regarding the data. All right, let's begin with a few warm-up problems. Please write the answers down on a piece of paper or in your notebook and then check back for the answers. All right, the first problem, as you probably guessed it, is 3/5. The second subtraction problem is 5/10 or 1/2. The third is 7/8. Let's move on to the next set of problems. Go ahead and pause the video and try these out. All right, now that you're back, you probably got 5/6 for this one. You probably got 3/2, or if you're really good, you put that into a mixed number as 1 and 1/2. And finally, you probably got 13/12, or again, 1 and 1/12. Let's try these last three problems on your own. Go ahead and try them out and come back. All right, for the first one. 12/3, which is equivalent to 4 wholes. 70/100 minus 3/10, you needed to make sure you converted the 3/10 into hundreds so that we could subtract. So 70/100 minus 30/100 would get us 40/100, or 4/10. And last but not least, down here, long problem, you would have ended up getting 25 or 25/4, which is the same thing as 6 and 1/4. Okay, boys and girls, for today's lesson, we are going to be measuring insects in our journal page. Actually, we are going to be using journal page 264 and 265, which you can turn to now while we get ready. You are going to need a ruler today. So if you could pause the video and try to find a ruler that is in inches and has some dashes in between the inch mark so that we can measure more accurately. If for some reason you don't have a ruler at home, you will be able to still use the data that we provide for you into making the line plot. When you're ready, come back. We're going to talk about this ruler. Okay, so this ruler right here is a standard ruler that has different marks on it. Now, when we first look at the mark, the biggest dash is the purple dash. And I think we all can look at that and say that that line represents 1/2 of an inch. Now, it's not purple on your ruler, most likely. However, the colors represent the different types of lines that we have in here. Now, there is a pink line in here as well. The pink line is the next biggest line. Can you guess what that represents? If you said 1/4 of an inch, you're correct. And if you think about it, the reason it's 1/4 of an inch is because there's 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's now look at the next line, which is the green line. If you said that that one represents 1/8 of an inch, you're correct. And again, 1 space, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's why it's called 1/8 of an inch. And last but not least, the smallest one is a 1/16 of an inch, which is very small. And there are 16 little spaces in between all of the blue dash. All right. So today we will measure insects to the nearest 1/8 of an inch to generate data for a line plot, and then use the line plot to solve problems involving the addition and subtraction of fractions and mixed numbers. So right now, on pages 264 and 265, there are different insects, and you can notice that you are going to be measuring the line next to, above, or under the insect to the nearest 1/8 of an inch, which means that every measurement that you have, unless it is exactly an inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, or 4 inches, should have a fraction with it that has an 8 in the denominator. So for example, let's take a look at the short-tailed dusk darter dragonfly. That is on the, I'm looking for the page here. It is on page 265. Go ahead and measure that, and we'll practice together. So if you have measured that, go ahead and pause the video, and then come back and see what you got. Okay, so after looking at that, that one measured 1 6/8 of an inch. So it was very close to being 2 inches, but not quite. Remember, if you didn't get that, line up your ruler again and see if you can see where the 1/8 of an inch marks are. Now what we're going to do is you are going to try and measure the rest of the insects on your own. If for some reason you don't have a ruler, you are going to wait to fill in the number after we are finished. So come back when you are finished measuring and check your answers. All right. Hopefully you were measuring, and chances are you might have gotten a few wrong on here just because measuring is very precise, and depending on how you use the ruler, you really need to be accurate with this. So let's check our work. So the boreal firefly measured 3/8 of an inch, so that was very small. The yellow bumblebee was 6/8 of an inch. The damselfly was 1 2/8 of an inch. The ground beetle was 7/8 of an inch. The green lacewing was 5/8 of an inch. And remember, if you were 1/8 of an inch off, you're close. But if you were 4/8 of an inch off, we need to go back and look at that again. So make sure you're going back and measuring again if you make a mistake. Ladybug was 3/8 of an inch. The Carolina mantid was 1 6/8 of an inch. The red-legged grasshopper was 1 inch. Now there's no fraction after that because it was exactly 1 inch. The American cockroach was 1 4/8 of an inch, which you might have said it's 1.5, but remember, when we go to plot our data, it's going to be easier if all the denominators have an 8 there. So if you have 1.5 written down, I would write 1 4/8 next to it. Same thing goes for any of the other ones if you have an equivalent fraction written down. The green June beetle is 6/8 of an inch. The paper wasp is 5/8 of an inch. The southeastern field cricket is 7/8 of an inch. The Indian meal moth is 3/8 of an inch, and the katydid is 1 6/8 of an inch. If you got any of those wrong, pause the video, go back and measure again just to make sure you're seeing where your mistake is. Please don't just go ahead and play the video just to continue on. Go back and check your mistakes. Okay, boys and girls, so on page 266, you're going to notice that there is a graph that we've worked with before at the bottom. This line plot is going to be something that you are going to try and fill in. A couple things to keep in mind. There needs to be a title, which goes at the top. There also needs to be a unit, which goes at the bottom. And there also needs to be the same increment of measurement going up on the bottom axes. So for example, if I was to start with 1/8 and go up to 2/8, the next one would be 3/8, 4/8, 5/8. Now, I'm not going to guarantee you that it's going to start at 1/8. You need to look at your data and say, what is the smallest data that I have? Maybe it makes sense to start at 2/8. Maybe it makes sense to start at 3/8. Maybe it makes sense to start at 4/8. So before you write your numbers on the bottom, make sure that you look to see what data you have. After you write your data, make your X's above the number so that you can see what the graph will look like. This type of line plot will help us determine how many insects we have measuring at certain lengths. Now, some of the measurements might have 0 X's, some might have 2, some might have 3. What I would recommend doing is crossing off as you plot. So for example, after you plot a red-legged grasshopper, cross it off lightly so that you know you've already plotted that. Come back and check your graph and see how you did. Okay, boys and girls, now this is a sample title, but it could be insect lengths or insect lengths. You might have chosen something else, but it should be similar to that. Now, the unit would be length, since we're measuring the length, and it's going to be in inches. If you just wrote inches, make sure you write length in inches. And then Our data should be written like this: 3/8, 4/8, all the way up to 1 6/8, since that's the largest data that we have. And last but not least, check your x's to make sure that they line up. You may need to pause the video to check, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, boys and girls, we are now ready for page 267. These types of journal pages are one of my favorites because it requires you to look back at the data that you've already collected. It also requires you to read very closely and to not move quickly through this journal page. If you move quickly through this journal page, I can guarantee you're going to make a mistake somewhere. So please go ahead and try this journal page on your own, flipping back to page 266 so that you can see the data. Number one is going to be a personal preference. So I'm not going to have an answer for you, although your teacher can go over that with you at your meeting at 2:30 or whenever your teacher has their office hours. Go ahead and pause the video and come back when you are ready and finish with number 8. Okay, hopefully you use the data to solve the problems. So number 2 says how many insects are 1 6/8 inches long? That was 3 insects. And I can go back and look at my data and see the x's there. Now I won't keep flipping back and forth, but I wanted to show you how I was using the data there. How many insects are 7/8 of an inch long? There were 2 insects. What's the difference between these two measurements? So this one you would need to borrow because 1 6/8 minus 7/8, well, I can't do 6/8 minus 7/8, so I need to turn the 1 6/8 into 14/8. So that means that I'm left with 7/8. How many insects are longer than 7/8 of an inch and shorter than 1 6/8 of an inch? Now, keep in mind, longer means not including 7/8 of an inch, and shorter than 1 6/8 of an inch doesn't include those insects. So there were a total of 3. What is their combined length? Now keep in mind, we need to add up all of the x's. So if you have 3 x's let's say that insects are 1 inch long, you would add 1 inch plus 1 inch plus 1 inch because there's 3 x's in there and they're each an inch long. So don't forget, you're adding up all of the x's and what their measurements are. The combined length was 3 6/8 of an inch. How many insects are longer than 3/8 of an inch and shorter than 7/8 of an inch? This was 4 insects. And what was their combined length? Was 22/8 or 2 6/8. Number 5, what is the measure of the longest insect? That would be 1 6/8. How many insects have this measure? There were 3. What is their combined length? So remember, you're adding up 1 6/8 3 times. You can either add or multiply. You would get 3 18/8 of an inch or 5 2/8. What is the measure of the shortest insects? 3/8. How many insects have this measure? There are 3. And what is their combined length? 9/8 or 1 1/8 inches. What is the difference in length between the longest and shortest insects? 1 3/8. Write and solve your own problem using data from your line plot. Hopefully you made up the question on your own. We're now ready for math boxes. Go ahead and pause the video and complete these on your own and come back when you're ready. Okay, the first answer is A, 97,000 grams. The second answer is our in and out table: 459, 345, 1,950, 726, 2,865. Number 3, a number model that you could have used was 5/5 minus 2/5 equals 3/5. Number 4 was 89 with a remainder of 2, and 74 boxes were needed. Last but not least, there's what did you do with the remainder in problem 4B? Well, if you need to get all of the pencils into a box, that means that you need to make sure that you add that extra box. Last but not least, you have homework tonight to make sure that you use the data, give it a title, give it a unit, and record it, and then answer the follow-up questions along with number 6, 7, 8, and 9 at the bottom. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and make sure that you are very careful with your reading of the problem, your tallying of the problem, and make sure that you check it twice. Have a wonderful day. I will see you again.